it dawned on me this morning that a river does not look at other rivers and wonder about how to be a river by looking at them. A river simply embodies itself and allows itself to be. And it exists as such, as a river. It doesn't compare itself to other rivers. It doesn't look at the current of another river and go, wow, look at how fast he's going. There's no metric there. The metric for the river is just being itself.
Welcome to the Holistic Life Navigation Podcast, where we explore life through the lens of somatics. I'm Luis Mujica, a somatic educator who teaches people how to find safety in themselves. Your turn to learn begins now. Hey, Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a real honor and a privilege to be here.
Well, I just want to say the moment I came in and I saw your eyes and you started speaking, my whole body just got really settled. And that means a lot to me because I have a difficult history with men. So when I'm meeting with one, I'll have this kind of expectation in my body for stress sometimes, not all the time. I didn't have too much with you, but then when I saw you, it was like, this is so nice. So thank you.
That is probably one of the most profound and impactful compliments that I think we can extend to one another, especially amongst men. So thank you so much for sharing your heart with me.
You're so welcome. Tell us a little bit about you before we get into Sacred Sons. I want to know your story. What brought you to this work that you do and create?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm of a generation that is slightly older than yours. For those who can't see me, I've got the gray in the beard, which I wish just came from a lot of life experience, but came from a lot of life experience and just time as well. And I think it's still true today, although less so, where I was very, very much of a time where metrics were based outside of us in terms of our value in the world, in terms of whether or not we were good at X, Y, or Z. Most often as a man, as a father, as a husband, very much external metrics, the house, the cars, the schools. And that didn't leave a lot of space for self-discovery. And so for me to not get into too much of the historical, when I lost my job in 2017, everything that I would say I thought was solid underneath me was taken away. Because I was a protector and a provider based primarily on my capacity to support the home. And that was gone in a 7-minute meeting. And I did what we were taught to do. I manned up. I kept a stoic face. I didn't tell anyone for 3 weeks. I suppressed it out of shame, but also because I knew I needed a plan in order to share it with my wife and to make sure that her and the kids felt safe. And while I was preparing all that, I also started to literally Google, what does it mean to be a good husband, to be a good father? And I ended up also Googling, what does it mean to be a man? And that's when I started to come across men's work. And I'm addicted to self-help, I will admit it. And it has not always been a supportive, just the very nature of the word addiction tells you that it was not always supportive. And so I entered into this men's help, men's work, men's journey process. I've been with multiple organizations, and when I came across Sacred Sons in 2019, I resisted mostly because I didn't see myself in it. I think I was afraid of the level of emotion. And 2 days before lockdown here in Montreal, where I'm based, the ancestral lands of Jojage, I joined Sacred Sons. I jumped in, and I it is not an underestimation to say that that decision not only supported my capacity to be there for my children during a difficult time, but probably saved my life.
Just taking all that in.
Yeah. I err on the side of openness, in case you
That's
are wondering.
works very well for me. So with that in mind, my first question is 2017, how old were you?
2017, I was 46.
So 46, and you're asking the question, what is a man?
Yeah.
Right? And what makes a man a good father, husband, provider? I'm so curious, what was your development like? Like, what did you think man meant, or what were you told?
You know, for one, emotion, you were meant to be the emotional foundation on which the family was built. And that meant you were a rock, right? So, and we don't typically associate rocks with feeling, right? We don't typically associate them with softness or suppleness. They're rocks. So you needed to be hard, you needed to be strong. And I, like many people, I think, and I would struggle to name one, but I mean, certainly athletes were a good example, of what it meant to be a man, all of the movies, right? The iconic actors, the emotions that they demonstrated were typically around anger or, I guess in the most positive areas, conviction, right? The strength of conviction and determination and these things. But very little of that was about what I would say and associate today with like my own personal intimate humanity. And almost none of it came out of any kind of self-reflection about what felt good for me in my body.
I love this. I love that. I often refer to this as the cinematic drag kings, these like huge male archetypes, right? That actually don't really reflect anyone that I've ever known. Even the most like quote masculine jockey male, they're not reflected in these scenes and these characters that are created. They're really kind of caricatures, right? These amplified versions of masculinity. But I find it interesting what you're saying about self-reflection, because when I see this in my mind's eye and I see my own development in your story there, you're seeing this externalization of some figure, some mythical figure that you can't be and you don't know anyone around you to be. And then there's this internal person, this internal self that's kind of waiting for you to relate to him, to connect. And you don't really connect with that part because you're looking out trying to be this thing that is essentially being projected for you. So was it literally 2017 when you began self-reflection around that, or did it start earlier? Because you said addicted to self-help. So what does that look like?
Yeah. So self-help and self-reflection are two very different things in my mind, especially when we talk about the consumer industry, the consumer industry of self-help, right? Which is more about selling a commodity. Self-help has become a commodity. It is, and it's probably one of the largest growing commodity industries out there. And it's I would argue that it's worse today, and certainly is bigger today than it was, back in 2017. Especially coming out of the 2.5 years we've just come out of. So for me, I would say that very little of it was about reflection growing up. It can I do this? Is it something I can do? Read the book, do the thing, not be the thing, do the thing. And I share this in my TED talk. I consider it one of the 3 gifts that I got over a 2-year period, where one of my coaches at the time focused a lot on the Tao Te Ching, the Chinese teachings. And there's a lot of river metaphor in the Tao. And at one point, we got on a call, and I had been meditating that morning, and I said, his name is Brian Grasso, shout out, brother. Love you, man. I said to Brian, Brian, I need to run this by you. This profound realization came to me this morning. It feels profound to me, and I just need to reflect it out to you and see what bounces back. And I said, we talk a lot about the river, and you've been teaching me, you've been helping me to think more about how I'm feeling, about how I show up in the world. And I said, it dawned on me this morning that a river does not look at other rivers and wonder about how to be a river by looking at them. A river simply embodies itself and allows itself to be. And it exists as such, as a river. It doesn't compare itself to other rivers. It doesn't look at the current of another river and go, wow, look at how fast he's going. There's no metric there. The metric for the river is just being itself. Water levels rising and lowering, banks moving. None of that is important to the river. It simply lives into itself. And I said, what I really need to do is listen to my own internal river. Look at the limits of my banks and decide how I want to express myself within those. And he just kind of looked at me and went, we're done. Like, yep. And it was so liberating. It was so freeing to just know that all I had to do was listen to my own internal river. And I think most importantly, the limits piece was important. And I didn't realize it then. I came to realize this much later. But, we think of limits as this thing or these things that keep us down, or that are somehow we should push past our limits, or somehow we should exist without limits. Again, part of like this self-help, constant expansion industry that's out there, limits are actually very healthy. Limits are extremely healthy. If you can be keenly aware of your limits, if you can be keenly aware of actually where you want your own limits to be, then you know the space in which you live. And in fact, you can be at home in yourself by knowing where those limits are and what they are. There's nothing wrong with exploring what might be beyond those limits, but to live outside of them can be extremely harming to the self, because you're overextending, you're straining, you're probably doing what I did for most of my life, which is to say, not living your truest self.
Well, what I love about that is when we're looking outward, like you're saying, like I love the metaphor of the river, because I'm always looking at nature and seeing how it's so kind of self-attuned, it's not looking around, it's just in itself, being itself, expressing from itself. And I hear limits, and I use the word capacity all the time in my work, which is another word for limits, right? And I heard you use that word as well. When you have a sense of embodiment, you can sense into those parts of you that push against a situation, those parts that say no, the parts that tense up, the parts that show you when you're out of your integrity. You're beginning to create this inner relationship to these parts that literally say that's not natural to me, or that's not what I am, or that doesn't feel correct. I'm curious, as you practice that, especially these last 6 years, what did you learn? I don't know if it's what did you learn, but what part of yourself came through that was most surprising to you, that was never really there before?
That's a beautiful question, first of all. Um, and interestingly enough, I was somebody who was always very active. And uh, I thought I was thriving in that level of activity. And what I came to realize, and this is with another mentor and coach who was one of the most beautiful souls. I mean, he's my king magician, right? The master magician, Michael Gay. Shout out to you too, brother. Is that I actually thrive when I stop. That my power, and this has been very alive for me, especially in the last few months, where I've become keenly aware of this notion of a drive to become unstoppable out there. There seems to be this notion that's percolating up where a lot of the activity around self-help seems to be around this becoming unstoppable. And it makes sense, again, given where we've come out of in the last 2 years, where people told us to stop. We're going to teach you how to be unstoppable. I would actually encourage people to explore, what does it actually mean to be stoppable? Stoppable allows you to hear, right? It allows you to be attuned to the pain in the world. You are prone to bypass or to ignore or to miss out on the experience of yourself and others when you are unstoppable. When you are stoppable, things capture your attention. You can be held by wonder and awe and beauty. When you're unstoppable, you're trained to move in other ways. And so, and again, especially as a man of my generation, unstoppable was like, you'd put that on your CV. That was a job characteristic that people would like, oh yeah, we need him. Like, he's going to be an unstoppable machine. Those are two fundamental things that go counter to our humanity. Machine being one of them. I don't like the analogy that humans are machines. I never have. And this notion that we're meant to be unstoppable. I mean, I would argue that our climate crisis is largely because we think we're unstoppable.
Let's stop there and feel this, because that's so good. I love the invitation of being stoppable, and I love it as a man so much. So beautiful. It's such a departure from the practice and the conditions and just the identity that is thrust upon so many boys and men. There's such a vulnerability there. I love when you said about when you're stoppable, you can listen, you can attune to the world around you. It's really, really powerful, in a different sense of the word powerful, to be stoppable. It's really incredible. And it relates to everything you said about limits, doesn't it?
It really does. And if men of my generation, and this is a bit of a projection, so let me speak from my own personal experience. My sense is that if I had been raised in a society where stoppable was okay, where in fact it was encouraged and supported, Me Too probably wouldn't have been a shock. It may not have even been a thing, but it certainly wouldn't have been a shock the extent to which it was so prevalent in the world, and not just with Hollywood and other, well-known famous people, but just in general. The quote unquote news of the thousands of Indigenous children's bodies that have been found up here in northern Turtle Island, what we call today Canada, at these residential schools. would not have been news at all. So much of what we call the crisis of the moment, they're not of the moment at all. We just didn't know. We weren't paying attention. We were unstoppable, and we intended to keep moving in that way. Again, from a very personal experience, and the cracking in my voice here is less about the strain of my voice and more about my emotion. But had I not been unstoppable, even as recently as 2014, I might have actually heard when my eldest was telling me that she had been the victim of racism at school. And I thought it was just a kid being mean or her being overly sensitive. But I was unstoppable. So I didn't hear.
That's so important to me. I'm just loving this. One of my teachers and colleagues, she talks about the colonized psyche and decolonizing the psyche. And everything I hear you say, I hear coming from her, what I learned as well. Like, I hear these two forms of wisdom from two different people coming together inside of me right now. Because if I think of the work that I do is so rooted in trauma and body trauma, how the body responds. And one of those expressions from a traumatized body is unstoppable. It's like stillness feels really dangerous. So this kind of like fight or flight response state is this constant domination and moving. And so when I think about everything you just said, collectively and individually, these kind of pains and crimes against humanity, they really emerge from this unstoppable dominating place, right?
100%. And I have a story along those lines as well that I'll share very quickly. But so a sense of urgency. I have an Indigenous teacher as well, and she tells me a sense of urgency is a carryover from the colonization of Turtle Island. And why this was relevant for me is I found out in January 2021 that my great-great-grandmother is Mi'kmaq, one of the nations up here in northeastern Turtle Island. And my colonized mind wanted to understand the implications of that for me quickly, and wanted to learn more about my newfound part of my lineage quickly. And I wanted a system of steps to help me do that. And her name is Nikki Sanchez. And Nikki said to me, she said, Paul, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with this. For the next 6 months, whenever you feel called, you are just going to sit in quiet contemplation and call in your grandmama Marie, which is what I was calling her. Her name was Marie Metat. And I said, okay, and she said, no, that's it. You're going to stop and you're going to sit with grandmama Marie, and you're just going to feel her in your body. And I've come to understand that is the decolonization. And for those who feel uncomfortable with it, as a concept, decolonizing for someone who was raised in a white body, I can also associate that with the repaganization of my mind, which speaks more to the bulk of my ancestors. Right?
Absolutely.
So absolutely beautiful.
I love that. Oh, as you're saying that, so my teacher, Dr. Amber McSeal, she's been on the podcast before. She told me a lot about decolonizing the psyche. And then my other friend and colleague, Asha Frost, who's been on here before, she's an Indigenous woman in Canada as well. And she talks about re-indigenizing. And so, like, when you say repaganizing, it's all these different words to say the same thing, which is connecting to these ancestors before this collapse occurred, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And doing it in whatever way feels most right in your body.
That's right.
Not what anybody tells you. I've had indigenous people tell me I can't decolonize. Okay, that's where they are in the world, and that's fine. And others who have gone with this re-indigenization, which is also fine. One of my other mentors also says we've lost the definition of what it means to be indigenous, where in fact, if you look at the etymology of the word, indigenous means the capacity to live, to understand and live on the land on which you are, to which point anyone can be indigenous anywhere if they listen to the land, observe what it is offering to them, and learns to live in synergy with that place. You can learn to be indigenous. It's a skill. It's got nothing to do with who you are or where you were born.
I'm really glad you said that, because I can't agree with you more. And I think that's what Asha Frost talks about with re-indigenizing. And I think of Robin Wall Kimmerer in the Braiding Sweetgrass book. I think she calls it becoming a place, right? And that's exactly what you're saying. She speaks to in that book about the listening. If I can relate to the land I stand on, I create this intimate relationship to the place I am, and I become indigenous to that place. It's a place where now my body belongs because it's in relationship to it. And it's such a gorgeous way to unite all beings everywhere. I mean, there's really no borders when you can do that. And so I see that as such a, right? It's such a core work in my life.
There are no borders anyways. Those are
right.
another colonizing construct.
Yeah.
Right? But you know,
well, so okay, I'm gonna use this as kind of like a sliding board on this playground we're on. I love the idea of no borders. So I want to know, in Sacred Sons, how do you facilitate space where men who are taught to be guarded with each other, especially, lose the borders, lose the constructs that keep them from connecting? Tell us a bit about this, maybe about the organization, the practices, however you want to start that.
Well, I think I'm going to start by answering your question, so that I don't lose it, for one thing. But it comes primarily from modeling, honestly, and from not pretending to be anything that we are not, or pretending that we have arrived anywhere that others should be aspiring to. And I can speak here again from my own experience. When I first joined Sacred Sons, I was just another participant. And, one of the things I was thinking of was, well, how do I become a Sacred Son? Like, how do I get there? I would look at the founders, J-Mac, Jason McKenzie, Albert Bastia, and Adam Jackson. I was like, well, how do I get there? As if there was a there to get to. And the more that I engaged with them and spent time during that time, we were exclusively online. I joined again, as I said, 2 days before the pandemic, and everything moved online. Sacred Sons was already online in some almost prescient way, knowing what was coming somehow. And really, it was by watching the three of them and other leaders be open, as I call it again today. I much prefer the word open than vulnerable. Be open in their own journey, in their own experience. And even when they were holding space for others, their capacity to move to tears or to move to anger. And I actually remember one specific moment, and I'm not going to share who it was, because we honor that sacred space. But the first time I saw anger demonstrated in a healthy way was probably even more important for me in my experience than tears. And that's because I realized that I was somebody that was actually holding a lot of anger. And I'm not a big guy at all. Not even, I don't scare anyone when I'm walking down the street, right? Like, even 13-year-old girls, they're not going to be afraid of me. And that's a good thing. I don't want them to be. But, I'm not an imposing figure. And to see that anger expressed in a healthy way, and to then learn the tools on how I could do that myself, really opened me up to the release of a lot of the blocks that were inside of myself on a wide range of emotions. And so, first and foremost, again, to stick to the answer, it's about modeling. And it's about knowing the limits of the space that we are creating, whether online or in person. You know, you set up limits, you set up boundaries in a way that you are then creating a healthy set of standards. A standard is a way of being. A boundary is a momentary. A limit will often be a moment to moment thing. But there's a standard within Sacred Sons that has been established that I have not experienced, with all due respect to other men's organizations, anywhere. And it allows men from a variety of backgrounds and experiences to all come in and see parts of themselves in others because of that modeling. So I think that's the fundament on which we are born, is that starting point.
I want to stay there for a minute because I love that.
Yeah.
I think I'm so glad you responded with modeling as the answer, because that takes us back to what you said earlier, the being instead of the doing. You're not just teaching, you're not just telling, you're not just expecting, you're being it. And in your being, it vibrates to other bodies. Mm-hmm. And like when we talk about growing up and we see these like cinematic drag kings, that was modeling. That was what was modeled to these really soft bodies that were in development and forming. So this amazing place of being an adult who has that kind of modeling, and this divide between this self that wants to relate and who I think I'm supposed to be because what's externalized. And then you're in this space where there's these other male bodies that are modeling something totally different. I love open because it opens you, at least me, because I've experienced this in a men's group, opens me to the curiosity of intimacy with men, healthy anger with men, emotions with men, joy with men, like so many things I never experienced with men my entire life until then. Right.
Yeah, well, and there's a couple of pieces in which you brought up, and first and foremost, I think around the notion of openness, and I don't want to put them as in contrast or in conflict with each other, but openness versus vulnerability, right? And I love Brene Brown, don't get me wrong, but I think that vulnerability can be a little frightening and a little scary for some men because of the way that word is used in the world more generally, right? Now we're talking about vulnerability as a strength, but there's still going to be a lot of resistance. And if I were to ask, or someone were to ask me, I guess I should say, conjure an image of what it means to be vulnerable in something that might not be human. I'm going to think of a turtle on its back in the middle of a highway. Like that turtle's vulnerable, and like a truck comes down and that's it. And that's not really what I'm looking for vulnerability. And the more important piece around openness that I love is that it doesn't only allow me the opportunity to share what I'm experiencing, but the openness also opens me to receive. So we create a loop, a circle of potential exchange through that openness. That vulnerability, I'm not sure always does, because I'm going to be vulnerable. And so if I'm vulnerable, I need you to be strong so that you can hold my vulnerability. Whereas if I'm open and you're open, we're there for each other, and it's more of a dance. It's more akin to like Aikido, and we're moving with each other and in synergy. And there's something that is just more again, it's human. It's the connective elements that openness invites through as a powerful piece. And I think around the modeling, the difference when we see the models in, the Hollywood films or the sports or it's our ability to see ourselves in it. And so we look at those Hollywood movies or those athletes, and if we can't see ourselves in it, then it's not going to resonate with us. But when we see a man modeling, again, that healthy expression of anger or openness or sadness or grief, which is really, to me, it's the most challenging piece for men, is acknowledging their own grief. When we see that being modeled, it's impossible for us not to see that in ourselves, because these are all shared collective experiences that we have that will come out in our own ways, absolutely, but that at their essential core are the same, and that's different.
Yeah, I love that. And I love your difference between openness and vulnerability. When I hear openness, I hear openness. Like, I'm curious. I don't know what is going to come, but I'm going to be open to receive or give. Vulnerability is still kind of that X marks the spot. It's like a place to get to, and then we have our own connotations about it. So the openness is so much more non-dual, which I love.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do people, we have to close soon. You're very easy to talk to. How do people work with you, or what Sacred Sons, like those listening? I think I want to try this. Like, what would you suggest?
Yeah. So the one thing I always suggest is to be open to all of the experiences that are out there. I have found a home in Sacred Sons. I personally believe that the place where I would like to see more men evolve towards are spaces that, if they're not Sacred Sons specific, they mirror some of the same pieces that we have. But again, it's what's most important is that men are met where they are in their experience, and that they are made to feel as if they can be seen in those spaces. So first and foremost, we have continued to expand our offerings. We are now all over the planet, pretty much. We are in Europe. We're in Mexico. We'll be doing more and more in Canada, where I am, and all over the US. There's a very easy entry point, which is a 2-day immersion, which is happening in a number of different cities at any given moment. We don't waste time, so January is already up and running, and February and March, and we're booked with events throughout the year. The immersions are a great introductory point to this kind of work. If you don't have an immersion near you, then I definitely suggest what's called the embodied masculine experience. Those often happen in 6 or 7 different locations across North America and in Europe. You do have to travel for these, quite often San Diego or Phoenix if you're not in any of those places. But again, those are also expanding. So those are the 2 traditional entry points that people will come in that are kind of held regularly. There's an online, we just launched our own app late last year. So there's a Sacred Sons app, which is just incredible. So wild that we've come to that point where an app made sense for us, which is an online community, and men are sharing there and connecting in those spaces. And then you can always just reach out direct. I have no qualms about sharing my email address, paul@sacredsons.com. Just reach out and we'll get on a call, and we'll find out what makes the most sense. And if you want to step even further back from that and get a sense, this conversation's a great way to learn a bit about us, to get a sense of what we're about. But we have our podcast as well, and you can, tap into that and just get a sense of what Adam is talking to amazing people about and their experiences. So those are some of the easier ways to kind of follow us. And our Instagram is like no other. It really is like no other. So the Sacred Sons IG page is It's epic.
That was my gateway drug to you.
Yeah.
The IG page. I was just so beautiful. I just, oh wow, I want to hear more about who these people are.
Yeah.
So I loved it. I recommend it. And thank you for your heart and for your time and for the work that you do. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I want to thank you as well. It's always a blessing to drop in with someone and explore these in more detail and more depth. So thank you for that.
That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.